Hi everyone. Welcome to it's actually the last panel of YA ThrillerCon. I'm really excited because I'm joined by 6 amazing authors and we've got this great discussion all about twists, trepidation and tension in YA thrillers coming up. So this is a live broadcast to YouTube, so if you're watching live and you have any questions for us at any point, you can just pop them in the little box. It will actually be next to the stream on YouTube. I think it's on the right hand side. So you can put any questions in there, submit them to us, and then we can see your questions as we're talking and we can answer them live. So yeah, I'm just really excited about this panel in particular because tension and twists is just like my favorite things about like YA thrillers, especially why I love reading the genre as well. So yeah, we'll start off with introductions. So Lamar, would you like to go first with introducing yourself?
Sure thing. And Maddie, thank you for putting it together and for having us all here. My name is Lamar Giles, and I'm the author of several mystery thrillers, including the novels Fake ID, Spin, Overturned. And I've been doing it for several years now. And my next book is actually going to be a sequel to my middle grade fantasy series, which has some thriller element. And that's going to be called The Last Mirror on the Left. That'll be out in October. And that's me.
Oh, that's wonderful. So, yeah, next, Isvari, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, cool. So I used to write a lot of adult stuff, and I wrote sort of an adult novella that was a bestseller on Amazon. And then I sort of started writing YA along with co-authors, and that's sort of what I'm working on now, though my latest piece is a lot about criminal justice reform in the United States, as well as religious difficulties and sort of high school teenagers standing up for what's right in the world. And we're also working on some other books that are about queer and trans characters in sort of in their worlds and in their societies, including a fantasy series that's sort of based on the Mahabharata, which has actually a lot of queer characters that haven't been explored in fiction. So sort of what I'm working on. I'm so happy to be here. It's really cool.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining. Kayla, would you like to go next?
Certainly. So I am the author of The Wicker King, which the only copy I have right now is in French, but it's like a mixed media kind of like vignette chaptered thriller about hallucination. And then my other book is less of a thriller, more of a romance, and it is a lesbian space romance.
Nice. Yeah, I'm actually reading The Wicker King at the moment and I'm really loving it. Yeah, I'm almost at the ending, so I'm just like reading as fast as I can. Yeah, thank you. Dana, would you like to go next with introductions? Oh, Dana, I don't know if you can still hear. It might be the internet connection, I'm not sure. Okay, we'll come back to you in a moment, see if it will work better. Matt, do you want to go next?
Okay, yes, my name is Matt Killeen. I'm the author of Author Monster Spy. This is the US cover, and its sequel, Devil Darling Spy, in which the Jewish German girl Sarah continues her life as a spy in the Third Reich.
Great, yeah, and like we had an interview all about your book yesterday for YA ThrillerCon as well. So yeah, if anyone wants to watch that, they can find that on the website. Yeah, the website's yathrillercon.co.uk, and it's got links to all the panels as well as information about all the authors. So Laurie, would you like to go next with introduction?
Yes, absolutely. Hi, I'm Laurie Flynn. My YA thrillers are under the name L.E. Flynn. This is the first of my YA thrillers. It's called Last Girl Lied To. It was released in 2019, and it involves a girl trying to unravel the mystery of her missing best friend, who everyone thinks committed suicide, but she's certain that she didn't. And that was my first YA thriller, and this is my next one, All Eyes on Her, and this one is going to be released on August 18th, and it involves a girl and her boyfriend who went on a hike in the woods, and the boyfriend is found dead, and the girl sort of gets persecuted by the media for her role in it. So it's sort of told from several different perspectives about the people who loved them and hated them, and sort of what they think happened, and unraveling the mystery of what really happened to him.
Oh, that sounds amazing. Yeah, I can't wait to read that, because I read your first book last year as well. So yeah, I'm so excited about that new release. So yeah, I'm Madeline Dyer. I'll just do a quick introduction for myself as well. I write YA dystopians, and I'm moving into sort of the YA thriller territory as well. Although my last published book is actually a YA thriller set in my dystopian world. So it's just like finding my two favourite genres out, which was so much fun. Yeah, so let's start with the first question. I'm just gonna like open this up to the whole panel, if that's okay, and then whoever would like to answer it first, you can just jump in with your answer, and then we can get like a discussion going around it. So yeah, my first question for you all is, what is it about the YA thriller genre that appeals to you, and how did you get started writing YA thrillers? So it's actually two questions, but yeah. So yeah, I'll just like open it up to all of you. So who would like to sort of answer first?
I can jump in. So I started writing, I was writing a lot of adult thrillers and sort of stuff in the adult space. And I really started writing young adult because I wanted sort of fewer boundaries. And as I was developing my own personality in the workforce, I actually found that I sort of had a late teenage years or a late crisis in discovering myself. And so I started writing the stories that I saw around me, which started to be focused more on young people and the stories I had missed out writing or reading about as a teenager. And so I actually wrote more adult as a teenager, and I started writing YA when I became an adult, just to sort of explore just how fascinating it is to break boundaries and to discover yourself and your identity and to stand up for the good fight. And I felt like YA allowed for a lot more conversations about social injustice than the adult market, especially as a young author of color.
Yeah, that's such a good point, because like social justice is like a really prominent theme in a lot of YA thrillers. Because I know we were talking about this on the last panel as well, of like all the different titles that does come up in and how important it is. So yeah, Dana, you're back now. I think we left you with the internet. So do you want to just like introduce yourself? Oh no, have you gone? Oh no. Okay, we'll come back to you for introductions later. Yeah, so building on Isvari's answer for the question about what is it that appeals to YA thriller, what is it about the YA thriller genre that appeals to you? Who wants to go next with sort of like discussing? Like,
I do. So I'm 29, so I grew up during a really interesting period of like children's literature, during that like transition from, you know, babysitters clubs and then Stephen King and then nothing in between, you know. So after Goosebumps was really, really popular, there was this like massive influx of teen slasher novels that were very like scary movie that I was super into, and I used to read like 2 or 3 of them a day, and I was so obsessed with the concept of there being no adults to help teens solve problems and them having to use their limited amount of resources, money, and intelligence to solve problems. And I was like, that is so much fun. So when I wrote my first book, I really wanted to kind of like lean into that, because I think it's important for teens to see other teens handling things in good ways and in bad ways, to kind of like, you know, open up a discussion of sometimes life will hand you problems that are too big for you to really handle. It's okay to not have to handle them on your own, but, you know, also kind of like a huge part of being a teen to try to handle them, you know? So when I wrote my first book, I really wanted to kind of like delve into that, but not, you know, really make it an issues book, because I know a lot of teenagers kind of try to avoid those, and instead inject something that's just enough fantasy, just enough magical realism to kind of keep them hooked, but relate directly to circumstances that they do currently have.
Yeah, definitely. That's all like really good points that you've made there. So yeah, does anyone else want to sort of like build on this?
Well, I can say that I've been writing stories since I was a kid, so a lot of years. And I started out wanting to be a horror writer. Like I grew up really big 80s horror fan. So all those really like scary book covers that you see in paperback, like that's the stuff I wanted to write. But in my early adulthood, I didn't feel, I sold horror stories first, and I didn't find people in the genre, particularly a lot of the other writers, to be that welcoming to a Black presence, if I'm being 100% honest. I was part of an anthology that was the first anthology that was all Black horror writers, and the response was mixed. Some people were cool with it. Some people started out with the claims of reverse racism and how we feel if it was if somebody else was excluded, and it was a big mess that made me realize it would be a hard path to be me in that genre professionally. And so for a lot of years, I just kind of gave up and just, even though I was still writing, I didn't know what my identity was. And I ended up hearing about young adult fiction. This is around the time when Twilight and the Hunger Games were huge. Read those, thought they were fine, but then I started to branch out to other authors like Peter Abrahams and particularly Neil Shusterman. When I read Neil's books, it opened up a whole new world for me. I realized that there was stuff I could do for young people that I just couldn't do in any other space in literature. And I started to think about what sort of writing I could do. And that led to my first novel, Fake ID, which started me down the path of doing this all the time.
Yeah, I do love Fake ID because I read that recently, actually. So yeah, thank you for your answer. It's really insightful, hearing how we all get into writing this particular genre and the different routes that we have into it. And the personal experiences as well. So it is really insightful hearing all of this. Laurie, would you like to add anything here?
Sure. I sort of, my first novel I wrote was a YA contemporary. And I didn't really mean to start writing thrillers, but suddenly I was writing one. And I just sort of loved the challenge of dropping clues into a book and, sort of tying together all these different elements, and the challenge of creating suspense and creating doubt and all those different things I found I just totally gravitated toward. And now from there, I sort of haven't wanted to write anything else. It's I think YA is such a dynamic and interesting space, and you can do so much, so many different cool formats, and try out different things. And it's just such a fun environment, I think. And I just absolutely have had a great time writing thrillers. And now I can't seem to get away from it because it's so much fun. So I keep having more ideas, and I'm like, what if this happened? And what would that look like? So I think it just continually challenges you as an author, which is something every author wants to keep growing. So I think it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, definitely. That's such a good point about how it does continually challenge you. And yeah, it is definitely a really fun thing to write because there's quite a lot of flexibility within the YA thriller genre as well. That you can bring in a lot of different things. I'm really interested at the moment in sort of thrillers with supernatural elements and ghostly elements. So yeah, it's such a versatile genre as well. Yeah, so Matt, would you like to tell us how you started writing YA thrillers?
Well, I think I write thrillers it's a history delivery system. It's a way. I kind of had a big issue reading the books that I was given at school. This is very worthy, read this. And I kind of developed a mental block about it. And so I read a lot of spy thrillers and stuff, and that built on my interest in the Second World War and that kind of thing. So that's how I kind of ended up delivering history using thrillers. But I think it made me, hearing people's responses made me think well, why do I write YA? And I think it was coming from a sort of copywriting background where you had 7 words to say everything. You had to get the emotion and the product purpose and everything. You just get used to being very concise. And I think when I began to sort of read heavily again, I found oh my God, half this book needs to be cut. This is just waffle and pages. And children's books cannot do that. I was talking yesterday about picture books, just the most incredible writing, because you were just delivering everything in just 200 words, and that's it to tell the entire story and make an emotional connection. And so I think YA is as old as I can write before I would just lose my mind. I remember somebody handed me this sci-fi book because I love sci-fi, and it was had won an award, and I got 100 pages into it, and nothing had happened, nothing at all, and I was just I'm over this. I can no longer read adult fiction because they just need an editor or a scalpel. So I think that's how I ended up in YA, and all the other wonderful things that come with it, that you can approach these issues, you can look at things anew. And all the most fundamental books to me I read as a child or as an early teenager, and I think I want to be part of that. Who wouldn't want to be part of that? You know?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and like it is a really sort of like important genre because you can explore so many different things within the YA thriller category, and like the YA readership itself is so important because like it's teenagers in like their formative years that are reading it, and they're like looking at the books so they can see themselves and like see other people going through the issues that they are as well. So yeah,
Yeah.
Jane, can you hear us now? Can you hear us, Dana?
Is that you? Sorry.
Yes, yeah. I was just wondering, did you want to introduce yourself? Because I think the internet cut out for you before.
Yes. So, I'm sorry about that. I was having audio issues. So, unfortunately, even though my face was present for a little bit of everything that happened until now, I couldn't hear anything except for the very beginning when astute people who may have their eyes may have drifted to me may have seen my face all of a sudden kind of go like, what? Because all of a sudden I just couldn't hear anyone really suddenly, and then I disappeared a couple of times, and I was trying different spots and trying to get, I think it was a Wi-Fi issue because I'm on my phone now and it's fine. Anyway, I will be watching and seeing all of your answers again because I really wanted to enjoy this panel. I don't want to step on anyone else's answer about that. Oh, about me though. I wrote a book called People Like Us in 2018, and I have a new one coming out next year called Summer's Edge. I don't want to take too much time with the intros because we already did those. But please add it on Goodreads. The question being now, why do we write YA?
Yeah, like what is it about the YA thriller genre that appeals to you?
Yeah. So I actually started out thinking that middle grade was going to be my sort of age area, and I found out that the voice just kept like edging up a little bit. I didn't actually intentionally think like YA. That sounds like the one for me. I liked middle grade stories a lot actually, and then but like I said, like the voice started just ramping up. It started like aging up a little bit on its own, and then I did discover I was like, well, let me read some YA stories, and I did discover that the issues were compelling, and I remembered, it took me back to those teen years that like maybe I didn't want to remember all that well, but there are so many formative things that happen in that time, and you want to delve into those once you do think about them for a while. So yeah, it is a fun and painful time to write about.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so like my next question for you all, this is actually a question that I've been asked as an author, and it's a question that I absolutely hate. So I feel a bit mean asking it to all of you. It is, where do you get your ideas from? So, yeah, who would like to go first, or should I just pick one of you?
Well, I can say this, as far as ideas go, I don't know that there's one solid answer. Any given time, something could hit me. Particularly with my books, what I find often is because I'm writing Black characters, I always want to show that we're not a monolith. So I try to attribute skill sets to them that you may not associate with Black characters because of everything you've read or seen on TV. Particularly my novel Overturn, which is about a young Black poker player. And so it became a whole deal of, where does the poker player live? What is it they're trying to do? What is the mystery there? And it sort of grew just from the idea of this character plays cards very well. And so my ideas can come to me in that way. It's sort of like, this person does this thing. How does that look in a mystery? And then we just go from there.
Okay, yeah, that's a super good point as well about sort of breaking with sort of stereotypes and like the ideas that readers might have as well, and like showing characters that like anyone can relate to as well. So yeah, thank you. Shall I pick another name, or does everyone want to like go next and answer this question?
Pick another name.
Okay. Sorry, we should actually go next. Oh, can you still hear me?
Do I go
You a
next?
bit there, Maddie. Orphan Monster Spy was kind of born out of like growing up in the war-mad 1970s and early 80s in the UK, and then having my mum's best friend was German, so I had an almost unique at the time kind of relationship with the German people, and failing to understand how these wonderful, compassionate, lovely people who I knew and holidayed with could be capable of the terrible things that I had heard about. And also how clearly of the two peoples, we were the war mad ones because they were all rabidly pacifists and they couldn't play Star Wars. So it built up kind of like lifetime's horrified fascination with the subject. And I've noticed that, you know, the new novel, Devil Darling Spy, very much connected to early fascinations with disease and, you know, the rabies posters that they used to have before you had to look at for getting on the ferry, or the fact that the last smallpox cases ever took place like just down the road from where I lived. And so I've noticed there's a lot of stuff from my childhood that has tendrils which have then like connected with things that I've read and seen. In Devil Darling Spy, I came across Unit 731, which was a Japanese bioweapons research war crime that took place in Manchuria, and so I go down these rabbit holes, and then they kind of later that information re-emerges and becomes part of the stories. So I always tell people
great.
when
I
go.
I actually lost my internet then. First part of your answer. Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, can you still hear
You're going
me?
a bit in and out, Maddie.
Really weird things.
Just about.
You're going in and out to me.
Oh, I think we lost Maddie completely. This is my role as jump-in moderator. Kayla, if you want to jump in with sort of your thoughts.
Yeah, sure. So I am actually very boring in this regard. I am a huge research hound. So I actually go and like focus on like a genre or something like that, and I'll research like all of the previous works that are in that section, and I'll read people's like master's thesis and doctorates and stuff like that to see what they've said about the subject. I do a lot of like kind of Wikipedia source hopping and kind of like look and see what's available. I have a book coming out in 2021. It's a Peter Pan novel, and for that one I did like a huge amount of research on like people's interpretations of the text and stuff like that, and I read every book that is sort of almost in that IP, just so I can know what everyone else has seen and their development and stuff. So my ideas 100% just come from books.
That's so cool. How about you, Laurie?
I guess a lot of my ideas, I don't know, they sort of pop into my head randomly and often at inopportune times when I don't have anything to write them down with. But so, or in the middle of the night, and then I force myself to type it into my notes app because otherwise it'll be completely forgotten. But I think a lot of my inspiration also comes from like just the news and like things that I would find interesting, like I know with All Eyes on Her, the media treatment of girls and women and the double standard there, I found really fascinating, and it was a huge part of my inspiration to write this book, just because of the way girls can be sort of villainized for the same things that boys do, and the boys will be boys or they get excused for. So that's something that is really woven through my work and sort of a source of inspiration. I think most of my books, like as well as the suspense element, have like a social commentary element. So I'm always sort of looking for ways to weave that in as well.
That's really cool. I actually am so inspired by you guys who like do the research first, like you with the news and Kayla with doing so much research. That's always really difficult, and it can make your story so much more realistic and awesome. Dana, did you have thoughts on this one?
Oh yeah. So I tend to take my ideas from environments and places a lot of the time. So a lot of the times, places that I've lived, I kind of bounced around a lot when I was younger, and also as an adult. I don't generally live somewhere all that long, although now I've lived here for a few years. But let's see. There's a lot of books that I've written that have not appeared yet. But of the ones that have, my first book, People Like Us, that is largely inspired by the college that I had a really strong sort of formative experience at. And then the one that is coming out soon, it's based on a lake that isn't necessarily a lake that I have a strong connection with, but once again, there was a lake at that one place that I grew up in, and there's a lake in that one too. It tends to be bodies of water. So when I live somewhere, I form usually stronger connections with the lakes than the actual things that I'm doing there. Or maybe it's all like a psychological web in my head or something. Who knows? But yeah, so the stories come out of sort of little interactions and things that I imagine, or I don't know, little things that I don't know. I'm not being very articulate about it. For example, so my first story does take place surrounding a fictional murder that happened by the side of the lake where a body was found. And in my sophomore year, there was actually a murder, but a very different one, where a body was found
I think you're breaking up a little bit. Is it just me or
on a path near a lake. So
Yeah, she's breaking up a bit.
my memory.
I think we lost you, Dana. That was really cool, though. I mean, I like the idea of taking ideas from real life. Maddie, are you back?
Yeah, I'm back now. My Wi-Fi is back on. So,
Awesome.
yeah, I can see we've got a live question that's come up from a viewer. So I'm how much research did you guys say goes into writing a thriller? So yeah, I think Taylor, you were already sort of like thinking about research when internet went out. So I don't know if you can sort of like answer this one.
Yeah, sure. So I would say I probably do about 2 months of research. In regards to the kind of content that I want in my books, a lot of the time I'm writing about problems that teenagers actually do deal with. So if I'm going to have the responsibility and the privilege of providing content for people who are growing up, I want to make sure that it is text accurate. So in my my first book, it deals with a lot of like neglect and like the way that children deal with depression and anxiety, and a lot of information about a hallucinatory disorder that's kind of rare. And I did, I'd say maybe 10 hours of research a week for 2 months. I did interviews with people who had, I think there were only maybe 19 medical professionals who were still alive who dealt with the hallucinatory disorder that I chose, and I managed to get one of them on the phone to talk to them. And then for my other book, I did a lot of research into kind of like space business culture, because I really wanted, if anybody picked up my work and they were interested in that they could use the threads of whatever it was that I was talking about to actually look into something that they might want to do for their career or want for their life or something similar to that. I think in general, if I'm working on something kind of like Peter Pan, most of my research wasn't necessarily into the thriller aspects of it, but more about the culture of that property. So when I was doing research on that, I wanted to do research on what people who have studied individual characters and their like meanings within the text thought about their position within Peter Pan as itself is like a thriller text. So I'd say in comparison to maybe like historical fiction, I'd say it's maybe 25% as dense in regards to the research that you have to do. But for something like romance, it's probably maybe 200% more.
Okay, yeah, that is super interesting. Yeah, Matt, how much research do you do? Because obviously yours is a historical thriller.
With the first book, it's very difficult to tell. It was a huge amount, but like I wrote it over 5 years while I was working and doing other things, so I don't really know. It kind of built on this foundation of what I kind of knew and grown up knowing, which was easier. By the time I did Devil Darling Spy, I went, I will set this in Africa because I don't want to tell all the normal stories from 1940. I want to pick up a new and obscure one. And I thought, it'll be just a question of research. But like I had no idea just how sort of colonial and how little people have written about really fundamental things about, colonial Africa and Africa in general. And so it was like a massive amount of work, and like trying to translate things from French and using Google Translate and trying to make sense of stuff. So it was just huge amount. But I mean, that's mostly sort of the historical side of it. I don't write contemporary because I have no idea what anyone's talking about anymore. So, I imagine if I did that, that would be a huge amount of research as well. But I just wonder whether a thriller requires, once you understand how a thriller works, whether it requires on its own extra research. I don't know if anybody else has found that.
My experience has been when writing, I think Kayla made the point, when you're writing realistic things, you need enough research to real. You don't want to dishonor things that are important and factual in people's lives. And then I think when you're getting to the fictional side of things I think you need enough research to be able to lie plausibly. The example I would use is in my novel where I had to put a fake casino in Las Vegas. And so I just needed to know enough to make sure I wasn't putting it on top of a real location, which people might reinterpret as me using that real place as a stand-in, which wasn't my intent. And so I needed to know enough about streets where a vacant lot was that I could build my fake casino. And then from there, I could pretty much do what I wanted. So that's been what I've experienced in my career.
I sort of do a lot of research. I'm sort of obsessed with it. In my day job, I'm a lawyer, and so every little fact matters a lot to me. And so if I'm not researching something, it's sort of a conscious decision. When I have co-authors, I'll sit down, we'll be like, we are going to make this fake intentionally, and here's how fake we're okay with going. I sort of do a lot of research as I write. So when I realize I don't know something, or I want something to sound authentic or about a certain like time or place, and then research it. So sort of like Dana, I said a lot of things in places I've lived in, but I still don't know everything about them. So I'd say one story that really stuck out with me is I was writing sort of a YA spy thriller, and they end up in a hospital in Geneva, and I remember, which is a place I've lived, but I hadn't been to the hospital there. And so I sort of remember doing a ton of research so I could get like the color of the nurses' badges right that they wore in different parts of like the hospital. And that's my thing. I don't think it's necessary, honestly. I probably waste more time than I need to researching, but it's sort of, I look at YA, especially with contemporary, I guess, as a view into the real world. So I try to get it right if I can.
Yeah, definitely. Laura, do you have anything that you'd like to add on to answer the question?
Yeah, it's so interesting hearing everyone else's process. I think with me, my first draft, I always write really fast, and it's kind of like a messy zero draft. And my technique is I sort of put everything else in later, like the setting and most of the details sort of come later after I just get the bones of the story down. Because I find that if I don't have that to start with, I will lose momentum writing it, and my mind will wander onto like a new idea or something. So to avoid that, I just sort of get the first draft out, figure out what the story's about and what the bones of the story are, and then I do my research from there and weave it in as I go. So generally the second draft of the book is a lot closer to what the final product would be. So that's sort of how I go along. And I'll even make notes to myself, like as I'm writing, like add detail here, or like So it's sort of funny if you were to read one of my first drafts, but it's working so far and sort of helps me keep my momentum going. So
great, yeah, Dana, I can see you nodding along to what Laurie's saying. So is that a similar process that you have then as well?
Oh yeah, because I do the same thing. I just try to get the story out in like as much form of like a story. Even I call them like a skeleton draft. I don't know if that's an actual thing. It probably is. But I draft it from beginning to end so that I have something that resembles a story and that I can sort of follow when I'm then adding, like my CPs are just like, add description here and this doesn't make sense. And I'm like, I know. I'm going to come back and I'm going to make this actually, make sense. And you're going to know, that this person has eyes and a mouth and all that stuff, and I add like the pertinent stuff later. And I do research, but usually not in the first draft. Like I know that if someone's going to be like breaking into a coroner's office or something, that you're going to have to know like how that's feasible to do. And all the nitty gritty detective work type stuff, that there's like a certain amount of like reality that you have to inject into that. So I do my research, but not on that first draft. The first draft is just like the idea draft.
Okay, great. So yeah, we've actually got another live question come up, and this one is for you, Dana. So would you like to answer this one? It's about when the book is coming out. So you briefly mentioned earlier that you
spring 2022, and an exact date has not been set yet.
Okay, great. Yeah, so now we move on to sort of like talking particularly about tension in YA thrillers. So we've already sort of talked a bit about like the writing processes, how you go about like when you do the research in the draft process. At what point in your writing processes do you pay close attention to the pacing and tension levels? So I'll just throw this out to Hope, like whichever one of you would like to answer that, just jump in.
Well, I would absolutely love to be able to go to do a skeleton draft, and I'm so jealous. I can't. I have to. Everything has to be perfect and done in my head. And my first draft might take a long time, and I might miss all my deadlines. But it doesn't need that much editing when it's done. And I think I tend to write in chapters. They kind of like form one thing in my head, and therefore there has to be a kind of tension has to work within the chapter, I think. And then before I start the next one, I will tend to read it through. So I think I tend to tentpole the tension in as I go along. And I am probably very reliant on my wonderful editors to go, yeah, just speed it up, like lose 10,000 words here, to make that work. In my head, I am doing it as I go along.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So is that the same for any of the others, or do you do it any differently?
I think this one.
I do. I wrote my books really interestingly, and I thought when I was growing up, I thought this was probably like all authors did it. But then as I like became an author and started talking to more authors, I realized that I'm like probably the only person I know who does it this way. But I do really detailed outlines, like 10-page outline. I do one for the actual plot of it, and then I do one for character development and the way that the characters are going to be changing and growing throughout the story. And then I do another one, and it's the rising tension and what I want the audience to feel at different parts of the book, and what I want them to feel at the end of the book, and what I want the like overall moral and resolution for it to be. And then I just write what I wrote down. I'll do like proposals, and I'll send them to places, and they'll expect me to do changes and everything to it, but I literally just turn around and I just give them what they ask for. So when it comes to like, developing tension and developing, intensity, it's really easy for me to kind of take all three of my like drafts, and basically they're essays about what I want my book to kind of like deliver to its audience, and I'll match them to each other as I'm writing the draft, just to make sure that I'm doing that effectively. So with my book, even though they're very the writing is very stringent and it's very like heavily dialogue, very little description, the like amount of tension throughout the book is very deliberate. So most of my reviews, which I read all of, usually whether they like the book or not, they're like, this stressed me out a lot. So I feel like it's going well.
I was so excited to hear that, because I actually do a very similar thing. I think in my case, it might be that I have co-authors now, but even before that, I would like plot like so many pages out, and like a character too. I would like have the whole character sheet, like you were saying, or we're actually working on a mystery right now, so we have like entire pages that are just about sort of details that'll never make it to the book, but setting the whole stage and like backstories for every character, and then the whole plot and like things we can pull from. My sister hates this, so we actually did write a book. She's one of my co-authors. We did write a book once where we like had a general structure in the beginning, so we could know it was good pacing and good tension, sort of off of a template that I found online, just to make sure we didn't like get the pacing super wrong. But then we sort of just like wrote chapters in order, and so we just let the story be a little bit like a retelling of what was going on, and it was a lot more fun to write, but then there was a lot of like making sure we were sticking somewhat to the outline. And that's probably the most off outline I've ever gone. And we still had a solid Excel spreadsheet of outlines. So it's so nice to hear that.
Hear that too. You're actually the only other person I've met who does anything similar. So I'm so glad. No.
That was so
total opposite of you guys. I'm like, I write, I fly by the seat of my pants. I don't plot or outline at all, which is kind of fun because I surprise myself. However, it also leads you into like this awkward writing yourself into a corner and being like, I have no idea what's coming next. So that's sort of my process. It's kind of a mess. I don't know. It's just like, I sort of write and see where it goes, and then I fix it later. And if I have two timelines or multiple timelines, I might focus on one timeline first and then the other one later, and sort of just try to fuse them together and hope that it's coherent. That's sort of what I did with Last Girl Lied To, because there's the two timelines, and then with All Eyes on Her, there's a lot of different perspectives in it, so like different points of view characters. So I sort of my process is very haphazard, I guess. I'm jealous hearing about everyone who's more organized than me, but it's worked so far for me, so I guess I'll stick with it for now.
definitely sounds like a lot of fun.
So I used to do that purely, and now I've like tweaked it a little bit when I started writing with dual or multiple timelines and POVs, because I did find that was sort of really overwhelming me, and I'd like get a first draft out, and everyone who read it, actually, like a lot of my friends were like, wow, this is like really, really cool. And then my agent read it and was like, this is a mess. Completely redo it. And I was like, oh no, So like and draft two, like I did like kind of like okay, I'm going to outline this entire thing and make sure that timeline 1 actually matches up with timeline 2, and like the POV characters in each timeline are kind of like on the same like kind of timeline. They're like not talking like past each other in different places. And so like I now do kind of like a little bit of a, whenever like there are two timelines, multiple POVs and stuff, I make sure like just in a like skeleton-y outline that everybody's kind of like on the same page, so to speak. But I try to like keep a light hand with outlining. is I do like to discover what's happening in the moment. And when I find that when I do outline too heavily, more than just like a kind of like point here and point there, I find myself boxed in for whatever, and I find myself kind of like writing from point to point, and it gets really kind of wooden, like and I know I actually know a lot of authors that love outlining, and they swear by it, and I see because I write with them, and they do just this magnificent work. But when I do it, it ends up being like Jane walked over here. She said, "Don't go to the garage. Something bad's gonna happen." And then Jane went to the garage. She died. So it's like I do not do well with heavy outlining. Like I end up just like narrating what I've already outlined in a really bad way. So I stick to like a very light-handed, like bullet point outline of just like the most important things to not forget. So that's what I do.
I guess I don't really have an exciting answer for this in terms of when I pay attention. I tend to write each book anywhere from 3 to 5 times. I'm talking from scratch. Like when I do a new draft, I start with a blank page, and I pay more attention through each subsequent draft. It's just a matter of refining what I had before every time I rewrite, and I just find that each draft gets a little bit better. It's really very feels very nuts and bolts. But
wait, so you don't even look at
me.
previous drafts when you draft it again, or?
No, I have a big computer monitor, so I have 2 versions open. I have the original, and I have the new version that I'm writing. And if there's something I still like in the original, it might get moved over. But I tend to change a lot, and that becomes less each draft. The second draft, slightly different, and so on.
Incredible. Like I'm in awe.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of work. That's amazing. I think of that as sort of a rewrite if your agent divorces you.
Yeah, I don't know why. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it for anybody. It's just something I found worked really well for me. It is quite a bit of work.
Maddie, are you able to? I think we might have lost Maddie. So that's so cool though. I love all the different answers. It seems clear that like everyone has their own process that works for them. Do any of you have sort of a particular resource or template that you use to help with sort of tension in correct places? Because for thrillers, it can be really important to know when the reader needs a little bit of a breather, or you want to show that there's building up to suspense and then sort of release a climax or a false climax. So do you have sort of any resources to help young writers or templates or things you can share?
I actually do. I have like a kind of like a pattern for that. I do 3 major shocks, 1 like huge climax of a shock, 3 kind of like building on each other. So they don't necessarily have to be like directly connected, but just like moments of incredible tension where, things either it's like foreshadowing for something else, or, I really just kind of wanted to up the, ante or something like that. And I'll do like a little one near the beginning, another one kind of near the middle, and then another one that's like 75% of intent is the climax. And then for the actual climax itself, I like to pair that with a moment of like character development resolution. So they're getting the like highest level of tension that's going to be in the book, but then it's softened by whatever lesson that the characters are learning, or whatever romantic thing is going to be happening. Because I feel like once people get like, almost unbearable to be in the world that I built, having like a little bit of softness, that little bit of tenderness kind of really roots them to the like resolution of that climax. It really kind of brings things home to, end the book in tears versus ending the book feeling really anxious,
I'm like have to take notes and ask questions. That's incredible. Thanks for sharing.
I tend to think about something.
An amazing formula.
I was saying I tend to think about something a writing teacher told me many years ago, which is just don't stay in the same place for too long. And so when I'm working, I tend to think if it's a very tense, high action moment, I need something quiet next. And if it's been quiet for a while, I need to get loud. And if it's been really down, I need to get funny. And I tend to think of it in that, and that again gets refined draft to draft. But that's sort of how I think to keep things moving.
That's amazing. Dana?
Oh,
Do you have, do you sort of have like a template or a tool or?
Yeah, no, but this is really boring compared to those. I was just going to say save the cat. I use save the cat on my revisions. If something feels like it's dragging, I see if it kind of like lines up with this screenplay resource. I kind of started out writing screenplays and I really like that one. So can Google it, and it's not nearly as helpful as those. So because it's boilerplate. But it's a boilerplate one that I think is like you fall back on if you don't have something way cooler. But I like it.
That's super cool. Matt or Lori, do you guys have sort of a template or resources?
I tend to, I did film at university, so like the idea of the narrative, you've got an hour and a half, you need to set up, there needs to be a inciting thing, and then a bit in the middle, and then a big climax, and that's in my head. There's that basic structure, and I know that is where I will have to hang things very roughly. But I tend to do it. I think I do it by feel. I know that if there has been a really intense moment, the reader might need a bit of downtime. I used to be a musician, and as a musician, when you're putting together a set list, you know, you have to have something good that people have heard of at the start, and then like a quieter one, and then you build up and you have a bit in the middle, and then you rise up, and then you play We're Unbelievable at the end, you know, before you go. And so I kind of do it, I busk it, but there is very much in my head, you know, the idea of a 3-act structure or a 6-act structure or a basic shape of it in my head. What about you, Laurie?
I am fascinated by all these answers. They're all so good. I have absolutely nothing. I just basically, as I write, since I don't plot, I sort of have like a separate Word document open with like ideas for future twists or things I want to weave in. And I sort of just put them in where it feels right. And that probably needs to be adjusted in future drafts to make sure the pacing is makes sense. But yeah, I don't really have any method. So it's so interesting hearing all this because I think that's really cool. Yeah.
Well, it's also awesome to know that Seat of Your Pants works, because I think a lot of authors do that and do it successfully. It's something I envy, honestly. So that's awesome.
Yeah, I think now.
I think that's
my Wi-Fi is just handy. Thank you so much for taking over the questions there, Isvari. Yeah, I can see we've got some more live questions. I'm just going to put them up on the screen now. My Wi-Fi goes because it's very unpredictable. But yeah, Angela is asking, how do you find people to read your story? It's nice to have tools to complete, but now I don't know where to look. So yeah, Lamar, would you like to go first with answering response?
Sure. Nowadays, because I've been in the business for a while, I have my fellow professionals. We're all good friends. We can trade manuscripts. When I was trying to look and I was younger, I ended up joining a lot of writing groups. I tried some online groups. There were in-person groups, and I found that, you know, a lot of them didn't work. The best groups I was in had people that had the same goals I had, which was to be a professional writer. And I eventually stumbled on an in-person group that had several people who were aspiring for that same thing. And once I found those folks, we were able to trade work and get the sort of feedback we felt needed and benefited us. And so I would say try finding writing groups. If you find one doesn't work, it's okay to break up with them. It may take some time, but eventually you will stumble across peers who want to do the same thing you do. You can help each other get there.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, does anyone else have like any other ways that you can find peers to critique your work?
I think if you're writing for children and young adults, Scooby is incredibly valuable, particularly before you get published, in terms of finding contacts and, you know, finding new crit groups and stuff. Certainly in the UK, there's a very strong regional structure, which is very good for hooking people up. And it's well, once you have your own crit group that are your people, and you know them and you know their strengths and weaknesses and you respect their work and stuff, that's when it works best. But yeah, don't be afraid to break up. That was good advice.
High schools, actually, I was just that's sort of a quick one in the United States, but a lot of high school students are willing to read your books and they are the target audience. So while they aren't professionals and you might want like a professional editor to check grammar mistakes or plotting, pacing mistakes, they have a pretty good eye for what they like, and a lot of them will read as a favor or just because they're curious.
I started out having my teachers read my stuff when I was in college and in high school. I didn't really share it like super huge amount with my peers. And then when I was in like the last college, leaving college, I actually had a Tumblr, and I would share my work with people on Tumblr, and I've maintained contact with about 30 people, and I'll like still send them my newer stuff now that, you know, we're no longer kind of on Tumblr anymore. So sometimes even just like finding a couple of people that are able to even just give you the kind of critique where they write their own commentary on the side of a Google Doc, it's really, really helpful. A thing that I think is worth mentioning when you're looking for people to critique your work is that your audience doesn't necessarily have to be like professionals or other people who are trying to like develop their craft, because when your books come out, they're mostly just going to be read by regular people. And if you're writing young adult, it's going to be read by children. So, you know, if you have access to anybody who would be able to give you the kind of, you know, basic information that a regular person would give, such as I got bored after the first 10 pages, or this part was confusing. And even though, you know, a professional editor will be able to understand you, having somebody who's regularly like, you know, I don't get it, was really, really, really helpful, because when your book gets out there, those same people are going to be really good Goodreads reviews.
Yeah, definitely. That's such a good point about how like regular people are going to be the target audience. So getting feedback from them, like know which parts you're getting bored at, that's just so important, especially when you're paying attention to pacing and like working on intention and revision. Yeah, Dana, would you like to answer this question as well?
Yeah, sure. I actually did start with I was clueless when I started, so I didn't really know about, you know, these like online groups and stuff. And so I did send it out to friends and family first, which is not kind of the gold standard, because they're more likely to just be like, this is so great, I can't believe you wrote a whole book. But you do, it's true, right? But some of them like cast a wide net if you do that to start off with, because you will get some of those answers, but a lot of them will be avid readers too, and some of them will be like, if you ask pointed questions, I think is the key. If you send it to friends and family first because you just can't find anybody else, ask, like Google it, and you'll see there'll be a list of like questions that you should ask beta readers. And so if you ask pointed questions like, were you drawn in right away? Did you believe the characters? Like, were there any characters that bugged you? I think these were some of the questions I asked right away. They're really simple. But if you Google like questions to ask beta readers and you ask them, some people will just still say, I can't believe you wrote a whole book, as my parents like would say. But some of my friends or cousins who did read avidly would answer the questions that I sent honestly. They still try to make it sound nice, but they'd answer it honestly. And I'd always say, did you stop reading? Like, answer even if you stopped reading. Did you stop reading? What page did you stop reading? Why do you think you stopped reading? And that was the most helpful feedback for me in the very beginning with books that I didn't end up publishing or even querying, because it helped me sort of develop, like, identify and pinpoint what was not working for me as a writer and what I kind of had to figure out before I proceeded. So especially as a really young writer, I wasn't that young, but I was a young writer. That really helped me going forward. And then over time, I did find more resources on Facebook. I found critique books, critique groups. It's I think helpful to stay within, I have no idea how old you are, but to stay within your age range in general. If you're a teen, there are teen groups. In college, there are like college groups. So yeah, there are groups out there and stuff, but I think you can even work within your own network.
Yeah, that's such a good point about having questions to ask the beta readers as well, like specific questions, because that's just gives such valuable feedback. Laurie, would you like to add anything to this about where people can find readers for feedback?
Yeah, I've basically found my readers on social media, my critique partners and beta readers, just all on like Twitter and different social media channels. Sorry. When I was starting out and before I published anything, I was part of Pitch Wars. I don't know if anyone's heard of Pitch Wars. It's like an online writing contest, and it's absolutely fabulous for aspiring writers to work with a mentor to get their book query ready. So that's actually where I found my critique partner, who, and that was back in 2013, I think, 2014. So we're very close friends still, and we still read each other's work. So that was really cool. And just being like following certain authors or certain hashtags on Twitter and Instagram, even, like, just is a great way to meet people. And I've met a lot of people that way, and some of them I've been lucky enough to get to meet in real life after. So yeah, that's sort of how I've done everything, basically all online.
Yeah, it's great hearing about all your different experiences, because yeah, like there's no sort of like one way to find critique partners as well. Like that's what I really like. So pretty much like any way that you do it, like whichever way is more accessible to you does work. So yeah, the next question I'd like to ask, and I don't think Isvari asked this one on the internet, but this has already just said, and I'll go to the next one. But, how can characterization and conflict work together to increase tension? So Laurie, would you like to go first for this one?
Yep. So it was how characterization and conflict work together to create tension. Well, I think it's really important to have your characters develop as well as the twists in the story, and that's like a fun, like a challenge with writing thrillers, is that yes, you have these external threats of violence or external events happening, but your character also has to be going through like a, changing and becoming, like, the readers need that payoff as well. So I think in any twist that happens, it needs to feel like it was warranted, not just in terms of, wow, would that actually be something that could happen from an external standpoint, but wow, would that actually be how your character reacted? So I think, or acted in that situation. I think these things all have to work together, which is why it's so important to know your characters and their motivations inside out. And that's always a question I keep asking myself as I write, and especially since I don't plot. Some of this is a lot of the second draft. It's like, does it feel realistic that the character would go to those lengths? Or is that motivation kind of flimsy and weak? That's always something I'm asking myself, because I think if you nail the character and the motivations, other things fall into place. So that's what I found with my own writing, at least. Because sometimes if you don't have those motivations and it doesn't feel believable, you kind of lose readers because they don't really buy into it anymore. So that's something I'm always going back to in my work, and I think it's probably one of the most important things.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Yeah, Dana, do you want to go next with answering this about characterization and conflict working together?
Yeah, sure. I guess that sums up a lot of it, but piggybacking off of that, it's the sort of idea of a character-driven thriller. What is that? I guess it kind of has to work in concert with the plot, intertwined. But I'm a very sort of character person, to the point where people will be like, "Oh, like stop, we get it, like get out of her head," like the narrator. But like I think like you can't have the satisfying twist, as Laurie said, unless like you have all of the groundwork there. And so I think a lot of twists are very character driven. And so you have to have all of it like right there on the page, unless or else people are going to be like, oh, you know, like the author just like threw it in there to have a twist. So yeah, I think it's a lot of detail work, whether it's in the first draft or whether it's like you added in like over time and sort of like weave those fabric pieces together. I don't know that I'm adding anything at this point. Lori put it really, really well. So kudos.
I wanted to say something about it because I love like character-driven thrillers. Specifically, like kind of like more thriller towards horror, because I think that horror does a really fantastic job with using like character development to specifically in regards to having the characters learn about the world that they're in and about the scenario that they have to escape. So one of the things that is like a benchmark of all of my favorite kind of like horror thriller films is when a character does something in the beginning of the film that they haven't really thought about that part and get personally punished by the circumstance. And then the next time a situation comes up, they're like, that thing didn't work last time. Let's try something new. And then while they're being smart, the circumstance like doesn't reward them for doing that. I don't know if anybody's seen the film Lights Out, but they do a fantastic job with increasing tension through that. It's a movie about there being like a monster or whatever that can only be in the dark, but you can kind of control whether you are in the dark or not, which is like extra. And there's this thing that happens throughout the movie where all the characters are trying to avoid the darkness, and they're mostly trying to avoid rooms that are really dark. And then slowly over time, they realize A, that she can decide whether your lights are working, and B, that darkness that is shadow counts as well. So a character gets like yanked underneath a head from like full standing, and it's an incredible moment of tension because you believe that you understood the rules of the world, and then you learn that you don't. And when you're having a thriller where your character is like basic character development, just in regard to their relationships with others, the main, I guess, crux of the thriller that you're designing, having them kind of interact in different ways and learn and change and kind of alter their problem solving abilities around the main premise is like a huge, way that you can increase the tension while also maintaining like generalized quality.
Yeah, those are such good points. Especially like looking at films, I find that really helpful. Analysing why tension works in a film, but like sort of like looking at screenwriting as well. Like what Dana was saying about that is a really helpful resource. Yeah, Isvari, do you have anything that you'd like to sort of help?
Yeah, I mean, those are amazing answers. I feel like that there's so little to ask. Those were amazing answers. I think that I love the idea of sort of the plot itself being like a character. I just love that idea. I've always loved fantasy and sci-fi because the setting is kind of like a character and you see the setting develop over time, sort of what Kayla was talking about, how the rules can change. And so I love looking at either the plot as a whole as sort of a thing you can toy with and change, and it can be unique and it doesn't have to be sort of following a traditional structure, or I like looking at the setting or the rules of the world as sort of something that can develop and change and be exciting in its own right. And so I always try to think about that separately and then put the characters in that world and then make sure they're realistically reacting to it, rather than necessarily having the characters drive the setting, because at least for me, I noticed that I would sometimes err too much on that side where it was unrealistic that the characters would be driving a world they're living in to that extent. I think that's a mistake that I see at least a lot of in young adult novels, especially sort of dystopian novels sometimes, or like futuristic novels where one character's thoughts and feelings are driving the setting, which is sort of weird. So that's at least what I try to sort of balance against that. And I think it's always important to think of the setting and the plot in addition to the characters.
Yeah, that's such a good point about setting as well. Lamar, would you like to add anything?
No, I actually don't have anything to add. Those were all like really great points, and like anything I would have said has been touched on by everyone else. I hate to just repeat such great information, because I tend to think along the lines that have already been discussed.
I think that again, I have very little to add. I have a tendency. I know that it's possible my characters really don't grow fast enough because I kind of throw lots of stuff at them. But I think there's something in the tension of. I mean, it's a well understood thing that you put the bomb under the table and then the characters don't know, but you do. So you want them to move. And I think that in my books, you want Sarah to get to it faster, to how bad things are going to get, because you're reading a thriller and she's Jewish in Germany, and like it's you want her to catch up with you with what you know, and that there's a tension in that you use the character's naivety or their lack of information with which to push the tension.
Yeah, that's such a good point. So yeah, let's move on to like talking specifically about the effective twists. So I've got like a few questions surrounding it, so all linked. So I'm going to like give all the questions straight away, and we can have a discussion sort of hopefully covering all of them. So like firstly, how do you write an effective twist? And then do you always know what twists will be in your manuscript, or do these surprise you as you write? Like at what point do you add the twists in? So yeah, Matt, do you want to go to this one?
Yeah, I mean, one of the big twists in Orphan Monster Spy, and spoilers everywhere, is that was very much part of the story from the very beginning. I kind of thought, why would she be in this mess? And then I thought, well, because of this, and then that became the twist. And so I kind of built up to that as kind of almost the climax of that story. Twists do appear though, because I have have a beginning, a middle, there's a twist, there's an ending, and a couple of events that I know are going to happen along the way, and then I write chronologically. Stuff just happens, it comes out of my fingers. At the end of Orphan Monster Spy, there's a minor character from earlier in the book. She's hacked her way out of this burning building with an axe, and the door comes open, and standing in front of her is this minor character from earlier in the book. And I was like, I looked at the screen, I was like, what did I just do? I have no way of fixing this. I just want to, and I thought, well, I can't just delete it. It would have been that easy to get rid of my problem. And so the twist kind of happened, and then I had to deal with it. I went on Facebook and I asked all my writer buddies like what to do, and they all went, kill him. And yeah, so there's an organic kind of twists just happen for reasons best known to my fingers along the way. It's part of the process, I think.
Okay, that's super interesting. So yeah, Kayla, is it the same for you, or does it sort of arise a bit differently with the twists that you have in your manuscript?
Sorry, you broke up a little bit. Can you repeat that?
Is it the same sort of process that Matt was describing when you create the twist, or do they arise differently? Are you expecting them?
So because I do like intense outlines and stuff, most of it's just like I've already decided it's going to happen, and with the formula that I have about the 3 major events and then 1 final major event, it's pretty much set up like that. But I do have to say, in between the outlines, most of the like stuff that I fill in the gap are usually character development stuff. All of the, tiny bits of romantic tension, tiny bits of, domestic, domestic quietness and stuff. Sometimes I'll put like little itty bitty things in there that just to make the story a little bit richer that I didn't plan before, like some characters' favorite food, or little things about how they've endured their childhood that eventually near the end influences how the reader feels about their character development for the final point of the book. So that's kind of what I am with that.
Okay, so yeah, that's really interesting as well. Yeah, because like if you're outlining like extensively, I suppose you're there's going to be sort of less elements of surprise that could arise in the writing process. Lamar, what is it like for you? Like, what's the latest thing that you've added in a twist?
The latest I've added in a twist, because I do the multiple drafts, I would say no later than draft 3. And that's even when I'm going to draft 5, because by the time I get to those later drafts, I'm just trying to refine language and pace. I'm not looking to add plot stuff. And my twists tend to be the plot. So typically that 3rd draft is the latest. But if I feel like if I'm taking my time, I'm usually 2nd draft. I know what's happening, and it's just a matter of refining it so it's an enjoyable experience for whoever has to read it.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, so Laurie, is it the same for you then? Like, what's the latest point that you've added in a twist to
I usually go in to a first draft with an idea of what like the big twist will be, but that's about it. Everything else sort of just happens as I write it. So it could happen up until the very last page where there's like a epilogue or something. I'm like, oh, I didn't know I was going to write this, but here it is. And I think most of my twists end up surprising me as much as anyone else. Yeah, I'll just go in with an idea of like, okay, this is sort of where things are going to be leading, but that's about all I have to go with. So yeah, I guess it's just really organic how it happens.
Yeah, definitely. And I do like it when you get like a final twist at the end, like in an epilogue, when it sort of like throws everything else like, slightly off center. Like, I find that really satisfying as a reader. But so long as it actually like makes sense and you can see where was set up for that as well. Yeah, so Dana, what about you then? Oh, I think you're on mute. I think you'll need to unmute yourself first.
I forgot that I muted myself. Sorry, guys. So at this point in my writing, because I did not do that with my first book, but I do this now. I don't go into the first draft without knowing the twists. Like my light hand outlining does include the twists. I usually start like with a premise, like a query type outline, and it has all of the twists. I do sometimes change it as I'm writing if I'm like, this isn't working for me, I want to do something else. But I don't usually change something like that because that'll form kind of the bones of the story. So I'll usually aim for 3 and I'll like know vaguely where they're going. I'll be like, well, midpoint, I'll add the first twist, and then maybe 2/3 through. And then like at the end, I'll have the last one. Every once in a while, I do add an epilogue twist, but that's usually if like my editor or agent thinks I should. But usually I do start out with the twist. And that's actually the first thing I start out with, weirdly. I guess like the premise and then the twist, because I'll be like, well, that's what the story is. Otherwise, it might not be a thriller, I guess. I don't know. I mean, there are other kinds of thrillers, but I don't tend to write them. So I would say from page 1, I guess, like from my starting, I guess.
Okay, yeah. And Isvari, what about you?
Yeah, so I think kind of sort of going off what other people were saying, I think the big twist I know in the beginning, especially just because, the book often needs the foreshadowing to build up to that, or sort of building a character development so that there's a payoff there. In Eyes of Mikra, there's sort of the entire book is a twist, and that like nothing you're reading is actually what you're reading. So I think that for that I had to work a lot to make sure that everything fit and that it wasn't spoiling too much, but it wasn't spoiling too little, and it was believable and all of that. So that took a lot more effort. I think I do have like minor twists that are probably bigger than minor that I let happen though, despite the fact that I outline a lot. So for example, in both sort of YA contemporary thriller things that I've written, there's either a major character or a minor character who dies somewhere in the book. And so when it's like a major character, I plot that out and I make sure that the book can hold and stuff happens. But with the other book, there's a significant minor character who does, and they're all sort of in this sort of horror situation. And so with that, I feel like it came up a little bit more organically, and my co-authors and I were just like, this would happen. This feels right now. This character, it sort of feels like it's unlikely they'd make it out of the situation. And so I guess it's sort of a twist in that it's similar to a twist I'd actually planned, but I didn't plan it, and so it comes out a little bit more from nowhere, but in a realistic way. So I guess it depends on the twist for me. That one was added pretty late. That was added sort of second draft of the book towards the end, and I don't do as many drafts as Lamar does, so that's pretty late in my process.
Okay, yeah, you actually raised a really good point about sort of like making sure that the twist has a good payoff and like the sense for a reader with like building up to it in a way of foreshadowing it, but not over foreshadowing it to the point where the reader see the twist is coming. And I think that's kind of like really central to sort of building a really effective twist that surprises readers, isn't just so out there that like that's just too far in a way. So yeah, Kayla, what are your tips for sort of writing an effective twist that has like a maximum impact without it throwing readers completely out of the story?
That was to me, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, you broke up right before you said who it was for. Okay. I think it's a hard one. I think when I'm doing like my like climax twist, my most impactful, I want it to answer the questions that the environment that I provided at the beginning of the story would raise in my audience. So the very first, what's going on here? Who are these people that I'm meeting? There's something about this world that just doesn't seem quite, right. Like I want that final climax to be the ultimate resolution of all of those queries. And I feel like most of the time when I'm reading books that don't deliver that, even if they're delivering me something that's really impactful, it doesn't make me feel nearly as satisfied as a consumer. So having at least the main questions that they ask be, resolved is what I think is the best twist. And then because it's a twist, there has to be some aspects of it that are like, unexpected. I think that generally when people are reading books, throughout the majority of them, especially people who read horror, mysteries, thrillers, they always, try to figure out what the plot is at the end. And it's less that they're trying to figure out one of the plots and more that they guess maybe 5 and they're like, okay, the book has to end one of these 5 ways. Usually I'll pick the first way that they want it to end, and then maybe one of the second to last most, unusual, and then I'll combine them for that. So it's the one that gives them the payoff that they want them to, and also the other one that it's like, I would have been happy if it was this ending too, and I'll put them together so that you get both sides of that for that.
Oh, I love that. I feel like I'm learning so much just from like talking to you all, so this is really great. Dana, do you want to sort of like answer this question as well about how to effectively write a really effective?
I heard my name, but you broke up, so I didn't hear the full question.
Okay, the question is how do you write an effective twist that has a good payoff?
Oh, how do I write for an effective twist?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know if they're effective. But I hope that they are. I don't know. I think writing from the first page for it, we discussed that earlier. I liked what Kayla was saying, but I don't think I'm that skilled. But I do think about what the point of the twist is for each book. And I think for me, it is a little bit different for each book. For a couple of the ones that I'm working on now, it does serve different purposes. And it has to do with what the point of the story is, like what the story is about at the emotional core. I do tend to write a little more character-driven ones, and one of them is a horror. So Kayla was also talking about that. The one the one that's coming out soon. It's so hard when you're like trying to talk about something and be like, but I will give no spoilers away. I want people to feel surprised and satisfied at the same time. I want it to give the characters resolution as well as the readers. I care about my characters. And I want everything that feels like a puzzle at the beginning to feel like a completed puzzle at the end. So I want you to feel like you have at the beginning opened up a box and you see a bunch of puzzle pieces, and I want you to feel as you turn the pages like you're putting in each piece of the puzzle, and at the end you put in the final piece. So that twist shouldn't make you feel at the end upset and confused. It should make you feel like you put that last puzzle piece in and you're like, oh, maybe I didn't get it, but look how well it fits. That's my best way of saying it, I guess.
Yeah, that is such a great way to describe it, always a puzzle with like all the pieces coming together. I really love that. Yeah, Matt, do you want to add anything
I think twists. I'm saying this. I know I've heard this somewhere because it's just too cool for me to have come up with it myself. But twists need to be earned in a way, and I think you can just like shock, surprise this piece of information, and you know, if there was no way for them to figure it out, it won't satisfy. I think there need to be the clues throughout that you could go, actually, that makes sense. And especially if it's something you haven't spotted. I think, I don't know if any of you have been watching Westworld. Now, Westworld is, it's a little scattergun and messy in places and overly complicated, but every so often, because they're doing twists left, right, and center, and you can't figure out what was happening and like what, who. But there was in the first season a twist that was, I thought, perfect, because when you go back and look, there was even a clue I spotted, and I went, "That's weird. That makes no sense. What did I just see?" And it was only afterwards I realized I had seen the answer and I should have guessed it at that moment. And that was like one of the great satisfying kind of twists, because a lot of stuff it's not even that you can guess it. It's just, it is one of two or three things. Mm-hmm. And it sometimes, if there isn't something that makes you feel smart or, you know, it can be unsatisfying. And then sometimes I just like to throw people under the bus. So definitely done that. And then I have to go back in and put stuff in, you know, later on in the final draft.
Okay, yeah. Laurie, do you have anything that you'd like to add at this point?
I think everyone's basically said everything. I think I really like what Matt was saying about it having to feel earned, because I think that's so true. If you give your readers something that just completely came out of nowhere and doesn't feel authentic to your characters, I think they're just going to be wanting to throw the book across the room, and not in a good way. Yeah. It's like, well, you didn't even give me a chance to figure out what was happening because it was so completely out of left field. So I think it has to be rooted in what you've already created with your characters and your plot and your setting, for it to feel like a satisfying resolution. And again, like what Matt was saying, like something that your readers have a chance of guessing, or like, I always love a book where I'm so blown away and then I can go back through a second read and be like, yes, I should have picked that up, and like it was all there, I just didn't see it. So I think that providing that experience for your readers is such a cool thing to do if you can do it.
Yeah, definitely. And I really like reading thrillers for a second time and being more analytical in my reading. That's just like sort of work out like all the clues and the structure and really analyze why it's working so like effectively. So yeah, Lamar, is there anything that you'd like to add?
Oh no, I have nothing additional there. I mean, I think a lot of great points were made, and I tend to agree. And you know, and everyone's process is a little different, but yeah, nothing new. Twists have to be earned. I think that's been said, and I think everyone here probably does a really good job at that.
Okay, yeah. So we're coming up to the end of the time now, so I think we'll finish. I'll come to each of you in turn and ask what is the one piece of advice that you would give to writers who are like concerned about maintaining a correct level of tension at various points. So yeah, Lamar, let's come to you first this time.
Sure, I would say just don't beat yourself up about being correct, because I think we've all seen like every writer can do something a little bit differently. Focus on writing the story you want to tell, get feedback you trust, and then at some point consider yourself done and try to put it out in the world whatever way you see fit. But please don't beat yourself over the head thinking you have to do it the right way, because we've seen some of the most innovative fiction have broken the quote unquote rules.
Yeah, definitely. That's such a good point about like not being too hard on yourself and putting so much pressure on. Yeah, Laurie, what about you? What piece of advice have you got?
I think my advice would be not to worry too much at the start about being perfect or creating the perfect draft that as it appears in your head, because I don't know about everyone else, but when I have an idea I'm really excited about, it's like so perfect in my head, but then as soon as I try to write it, it doesn't look that way anymore. But I think my advice to any writer is to just kind of roll with that uncertainty and get the words on the paper. They can always be fixed later. No first draft is perfect. There's that piece of wisdom about first drafts don't need to be perfect. They just need to exist. And I tell myself that a lot. Your pacing and your tension can all be fixed later as long as you have something to work with. That's another thing I remind myself, and these are all like basic writing advice, but it holds so true, and especially with writing thrillers, because if you try so hard to have this perfectly paced book the first time around, you're probably not going to, and none of us do. So I think just go with your instincts and get your draft written, and then play with it from there and see what feels right for you. And that's what I would have to say.
Yeah, that's such great advice. Isvari, do you want to go next?
Sure. I think for me, I think one of the most important things is staying in love with your book and writing your book when you are in love with it. So emotionally being invested in your characters, feeling really sad if they go through a hard time, or if they die, or if they're facing a really big hurdle, being really happy when they're happy. I try to write romantic scenes when I am feeling more in love. I try to write sad scenes when I'm feeling sadder. I compose music, and for years I used a completely different sort of mental state when doing that than when writing. And I think my writing just got so much better when I stayed invested in the book. And for tension, I feel like it's very similar. If you are invested in the book, when it's like, I want this to happen already. And at some point you're like, no, this can't wait anymore. I really need to write this. And then a reader probably feels the same way. I really need to read this right now. And so sometimes when I have completely ditched the outline or moved chapters way earlier than I was planning to, it's because I was like, no, I really need this right now. And I think that's worked really well. So I guess sometimes it's hard. You're editing your book for the millionth time, but if you can stay in love with writing when you write, and do that.
Yeah, definitely. Dana, do you want to go next?
Sure. This is kind of a different way of approaching it, and it's not for every book, but kind of a like tension hack, I guess. If like all else fails, or if you're just like getting started or something, is if you think of it as like kind of ending every chapter with a question, not a literal question like what should I do next, but keeping the ball in the air. Like if you never end it with finality, like, well, we solved that part, time to go to bed. But if there's always kind of a something that they're mulling over or need to do urgently next, it keeps people turning the page and they need to figure out what to do next. That's a little tension hack.
Yeah, that's such a good tip. Kayla?
I think of all of the genres, people say the most about thrillers. Oh, that twist was really great. So this author is brilliant. Oh, this author's so smart. Oh, they're so intelligent. Like they never could have been able to, figure out to do this. I think that they say that about, writers of thrillers the most. And I wanted to kind of stress that you don't necessarily have to be like brilliant. You just have to work and do your research and be organized. A lot of writers, they come up with their twists from, doing research about things that have happened before, their knowledge of the genre themselves, the research that they've done about the subgenre of their thriller, the organization about the way that they handle writing out their books, whether they do outlines, whether they do, simpler drafts and then expand into larger drafts. It's organization, it's labor, it's research. You can do it. You don't have to think that you're not smart enough to write something incredible.
Yeah, that is such good advice. And finally, Matt, do you want to give your piece of advice as well?
I'm just trying to think. Somebody once said to me, don't build a conservatory onto the suspense that you've built. That you can exhaust your audience. Shakespeare used to write in breaks for the main characters because he was an actor and they needed to rest, and he would have somebody come on and make knob gags, and those were actually are really valuable to the tension of the plays themselves. And I think don't be afraid to take a moment out, and it doesn't have to necessarily be comic relief, but just something that reminds you of the humanity of the people. I was asked very early on, like, why is there so much about cappuccino and peanut butter in your books? And I'm going, because something nice had to happen to this girl that I've thrown into this pit, so it would be that, you can always take it out. Don't be afraid to stick it in.
Yeah, that's such a good point about like maintaining a balance as well. So thank you everyone so much for joining me today for this panel. It's been so insightful and like hearing about all your writing processes and your tips and advice. So thank you so much.
Cool.
Thank
you for having us.
Well, Maddie.
Thank you.